Ancient whispers speak of shadowy figures worshipped in forbidden rites. For centuries, scholars have been baffled by the true nature of the Cabiri, the mysterious gods of the underworld. By the end of this journey, you will understand the secrets of one of antiquity's most elusive cults. We will uncover why their initiation rites were so secret that revealing them meant death, and how these obscure deities held power over everything from volcanic fire to the fate of sailors. What is it about forgotten gods that captures our imagination so completely? These ancient deities remain a puzzle precisely because they refuse to fit into any neat category. The Cabiri were a group of chthonic gods, meaning their power was rooted deep within the earth itself. Their worship flourished in the Aegean Sea, with powerful cult centers on the islands of Lemnos and Samothrace, and even in the storied city of Thebes on the mainland. Yet pinning down exactly who they were is our first major challenge. Their number was ambiguous, sometimes 2, sometimes 4, and their individual names were often lost to time or spoken only in whispers. What we can grasp are the domains they commanded. They were masters of the forge, gods of metallurgy and volcanic fire, which tied them directly to the raw, creative, and destructive power simmering beneath the world's surface. This connection to the underworld made them guardians of a profound and dangerous mystery. The secrecy surrounding their rites was absolute. To reveal what happened in their temples was an offense punishable by death. This wasn't just privacy, it was a sacred silence so potent that it has kept their true nature hidden for over 2,000 years. Why would a cult go to such extreme length? What knowledge was so powerful that it had to be protected at the cost of a human life? The answer lies in the unique power they offered their initiates. Their origins are lost in a time before history. To understand the Cabiri, we must look to a world older than the Greece of classical myth, a landscape inhabited by the mysterious Pelasgians. These were the people who dwelt in the Aegean long before the arrival of the cultures we recognize as Greek. The Cabiri seem to be remnants of that ancient world, earth gods worshipped by the first inhabitants of places like Lemnos. Their deep connection to volcanic fires and the forge suggests a religion born from the raw, untamed forces of the land itself. Yet their story is not one of simple isolation. Compelling theories suggest they were travelers. Some ancient writers argued they were imported from Phrygia in Anatolia, home to the powerful cult of the Great Mother. Others saw a connection to Egypt, seeing in them echoes of the dwarf god Ptah, the divine craftsman. So, were they native spirits of the Aegean, or were they foreign deities who arrived with traders and settlers? The answer is likely a fusion of both. Their very name holds a clue that deepens the mystery. The term Cabiri is itself a puzzle. One compelling interpretation translates it simply as the Mighty Ones, a title that speaks to their raw, untamed power. But another theory points to a Semitic root, linking them to the Phoenician word for great. This single thread connects them to the vast network of seafaring cultures across the Mediterranean. Imagine a group of powerful deities, their roots possibly stretching back to the Near East, carried across the wine-dark sea by Phoenician merchants. They then settle on Aegean islands, merging with the local Pelasgian earth gods, absorbing their chthonic power. This cultural fusion created something entirely new, a group of gods so potent and mysterious that even the incoming Greeks, with their own powerful pantheon, could not erase them. Instead, they were absorbed, respected, and feared. The Greeks themselves seemed unsure of how to categorize these powerful beings, often equating them with their own gods like Hephaestus or the Dioscuri, but never quite getting the fit right. The Cabiri resisted easy definition because they were born from the meeting of many worlds. To find the heart of their mystery, we must journey to a wild and windswept island in the northern Aegean. Samothrace rises from the sea like a fortress of the gods, a place of towering mountains and dramatic cliffs. This was not a convenient stop for pilgrims. Its remoteness was the entire point. Reaching Samothrace required a deliberate and often difficult voyage, a physical commitment that mirrored the spiritual journey awaiting the initiate. Upon this sacred ground, the Cabiri were not called by their common name. Here they were revered simply as the great gods, the Cabiroi, a title that acknowledged their immense and undefined power. The center of their worship was the sanctuary of the great gods, a sprawling complex nestled in a lush valley, a stark contrast to the island's rugged exterior. Walking among its ruins today, you can still trace the outlines of the ancient structures. The most famous is the Arsinoian, a vast circular building that was once one of the largest roofed spaces in the entire Greek world. Imagine the profound effect this would have had on an initiate. After a long and arduous journey, you are led into this immense, shadowy rotunda, the air thick with the smoke of sacrifices and the whispered chants of priests. The very architecture was designed to overwhelm the senses, to prepare you for a revelation. This sanctuary was not a single temple but a collection of sacred spaces, each with a specific role in the initiation rites. There were altars for offerings, halls for ritual feasts, and special buildings where the core mysteries unfolded behind closed doors. The island's geography acted as a natural guardian. Surrounded by treacherous seas and far from major trade routes, Samothrace ensured that only those who truly sought the knowledge would make the effort to come. This isolation was a filter, guaranteeing that the secrets of the great gods remained within a self-selecting circle of the devoted and the brave. Why would anyone risk such a journey? The promise was protection, a divine safeguard that was especially precious to those who braved the uncertainties of the sea. Sailors and statesmen, generals and merchants all made the pilgrimage, seeking the favor of these powerful chthonic deities. The initiation itself was a closely guarded secret, but we know its promise was a talisman against the dangers of the deep, a gift from the gods who held sway over the very foundations of the earth and the capricious waves above. This sacred island offered not just protection but a profound and personal transformation. The rituals performed here were known as the Samothracian Mysteries, a name that resonated throughout the ancient world with the same awe as the more famous rites at Eleusis. To be initiated was to be part of an exclusive spiritual fellowship that promised a special relationship with the divine. The journey began with a simple yet powerful first step. Any person, regardless of their social status, gender, or nationality, could ask to become an initiate. This was remarkably inclusive for the ancient world. A slave could stand beside a king in the same sacred space, both equal in their quest for the god's favor. The first stage of initiation transformed the seeker into a myst, a novice. We can picture the scene. Under the cover of night, a procession of torches would wind its way through the sanctuary. The new mysti were led by guides, their path illuminated only by flickering flames, the sounds of the sea and chanting filling the air. They would undergo a purification ritual, perhaps involving water or smoke, a symbolic cleansing of the old self to prepare for the new knowledge. But the true heart of the experience, the climax of the ceremony, was reserved for the next level. After a period of at least a year, a myst could return to Samothrace to undergo the second and highest grade of initiation, becoming an epops, which translates to one who has seen. This was the ultimate revelation. It was in this apoptic rite that the deepest secrets of the cult were finally unveiled. What did they see? We simply do not know for certain, and that is by design. The entire process was bound by a sacred and terrifying oath of silence. Initiates were forbidden on pain of death from ever speaking about the specific rituals, the sacred objects shown, or the words that were spoken. This vow was so effective that, unlike the myths of Olympus which were written down and spread far and wide, the core of the Samothracian Mysteries died with its last initiates. We are left with fragments and educated guesses. Scholars believe the revelation may have involved the display of powerful symbolic objects, perhaps a great magnetic stone that demonstrated an invisible force, or sacred vessels representing the generative powers of the earth. There might have been a dramatic reenactment of a sacred story, a myth concerning the great gods themselves that explained the nature of life, death, and divine protection. The power of the experience did not lie in learning a complex theology, but in witnessing something transformative. It was a visceral, emotional encounter designed to forge an unbreakable bond between the initiate and the deities. This bond was the real prize. To have seen the mysteries was to carry a divine safeguard for the rest of one's life, a protective charm whispered about across the Mediterranean. This promise of safety, especially from the perils of shipwreck, is what drew so many sailors and travelers to this remote island. They braved the journey and swore the oath for a simple, powerful reason: to gain the favor of the gods who held the earth and sea in their hands. Even with the deepest secrets forever sealed, we can still attempt to map the shadowy family of the Cabiri. Their divine genealogy is a labyrinth of conflicting accounts, a puzzle where the pieces never seem to fit perfectly. At the heart of this family tree, most sources point to a powerful father god. This elder deity was often syncretized or fused with the Greek gods Hephaestus and Dionysus. On the surface, this seems contradictory. Hephaestus was the divine blacksmith, the master of the volcanic forge, a perfect match for the Cabiri's chthonic, fiery power. But Dionysus, he was the god of wine, ecstasy, and liberation. Why would he be linked to these underworld gods? The connection lies in the concept of raw, untamed life force. Both the fire of the forge and the frenzy of the vine represent powerful, elemental energies that erupt from the earth. The father Cabir was the source of this primal, creative power. Alongside him stood a great mother goddess. She was sometimes identified as Cybele, the Anatolian mother of the mountains, or as Demeter, the Greek goddess of the harvest. This maternal figure represented the fertile, nurturing aspect of the earth itself, the soil that receives the seed and brings forth life. She was the complement to the father's explosive energy, the ground from which all power grew. But here is where the mystery truly deepens. The most intense worship, the very focus of the secret rites, seems to have been directed not at the elder gods but at their two sons. These younger Cabiri were the active agents of their parents' power. They were often depicted as youthful, vigorous figures, and they were the ones who directly intervened in the world of mortals. Why would the initiates focus on the sons? Perhaps because they were more accessible, more relatable divine figures who acted as intermediaries. They were the ones who could hear a sailor's prayer in a storm and calm the waves. Their names, however, are almost entirely lost to us. They were known simply as the Cabiri or given nicknames like the Mighty Ones. In some traditions, they were equated with the Dioscuri, Castor, and Pollux, the twin gods who were also revered as protectors of sailors. This association reinforces their role as divine saviors, the ones who offered the protection that was the cult's most famous promise. So we have a father of fire and ecstasy, a mother of earth and grain, and two powerful sons who held the fate of mortals in their hands. This divine family was not a neat, orderly pantheon. It was a fluid, evolving understanding of power, where the most important deities were the ones whose true names were never spoken aloud, whose identities remained just beyond the grasp of history, waiting in the shadows of their own sanctuary. Deep within the sanctuary, the initiates did not call upon the vague great gods, but whispered specific and potent names: Axiros, Axiokosa, and Axiokosos. This triad forms the core of the Samothracian mystery, a divine family that reveals the cult's profound connection to the cycles of the earth, life, and what lies beyond. Axiros was the Great Mother, a figure immediately linked by ancient writers to the grain goddess Demeter. Her power was that of the fertile soil, the nurturing force that brings forth the harvest from the dark earth. Beside her stood Axiokosa, her daughter, who was equated with the queen of the underworld, Persephone. She represented the maiden, the seed that must descend into the darkness before it can sprout anew. Completing this family was Axiochousos, the father, a clear parallel to Hades, the lord of the dead. This direct mapping onto the most powerful chthonic gods of the Greek pantheon is no accident. It tells us that the ultimate secret of the Cabiri was not about craftsmanship or sailors alone, but about the fundamental rhythm of existence itself. The mystery celebrated on Samothrace was the very drama of life, death, and rebirth. The initiates were not just seeking protection from a stormy sea, they were seeking an understanding of the greatest storm of all, the journey of the soul. Why would a cult promising safe passage to sailors focus so intensely on the gods of the underworld? The answer lies in the nature of the ancient world. The sea was not just another element, it was a liquid underworld, a chaotic and deadly realm that could swallow a person whole, sending them on a one-way journey to the domain of Hades. By aligning their great gods with the rulers of that final destination, the cult offered initiates a powerful form of spiritual insurance. To be under the protection of Axiochousos, the Hades figure, was to be safe from the very death he commanded. This trinity transformed the Cabiri from helpful spirits into masters of cosmic order. The mother, the maiden, and the lord of the dead represent a complete system. Xeros gives life, Axiochousos descends and is transformed, and Axiochousos rules the realm of that transformation. An initiate who witnessed this mystery would have understood that death was not an end, but a necessary phase in a grand, eternal cycle, just as the seed must die in the earth to become a stalk of wheat. This knowledge was the ultimate safeguard. It offered courage not just against the perils of the sea, but against the fear of mortality itself. The physical protection from shipwreck was merely the surface benefit of a much deeper, psychological armor granted by the great gods of Samothrace. This fiery connection to the Earth's core finds its most vivid expression in the Forge. While the mysteries of Samothrace focused on the cycle of life and death, on the island of Lemnos, the Cabiri revealed a different facet of their power, one tied directly to the transformative magic of fire and metal. Here, their identity merged seamlessly with that of Hephaestus, the Olympian god of the blacksmith. Lemnos was a volcanic island, a place where the underworld literally breathed fire and spat smoke, making it the perfect earthly home for a divine smith. The Cabiri were not just neighbors to Hephaestus on Lemnos, they were essentially his divine workshop partners, the local spirits of the forge who embodied the same raw, creative force. Think of the immense power that fire and metal represented in the ancient world. This was the cutting edge of technology. It was the difference between a simple wooden plow and a strong iron one that could turn tough soil, between a bronze dagger and a superior steel sword. The Cabiri, as gods of metallurgy, were the patrons of this entire industrial revolution. They were the divine guardians of the artisans, the blacksmiths who labored in soot-filled workshops, turning raw, unrefined ore into tools, art, and weapons. This patronage positioned them at the very heart of ancient society's progress. A community's safety and prosperity depended on the quality of its metalwork, from the nails in its ships to the blades of its defenders. To invoke the Cabiri was to seek a blessing on this vital, dangerous craft. The work of a smith was itself a kind of mystery. It involved a descent into the underworld, not of the soul but of raw stone. Miners would bring up ore from deep, dark pits, a material that looked like any other rock. Then, through the application of intense, controlled fire, the smith would perform a miracle. He would force the metal to separate from the stone, to melt and flow, and then through hammer blows and quenching in water, he would give it a new, purposeful form. This entire process was a powerful alchemy, a sacred transformation that mirrored the life-death-rebirth cycle revered at Samothrace. The raw ore was like a soul in its earthly prison. The fire was the trial, and the finished blade or plowshare was the resurrected form, stronger and imbued with purpose. The Cabiri presided over this entire sacred operation. They were the masters of a dangerous elemental power. A forged fire could create a civilization's tools, but it could also burn down a workshop. A well-made sword could protect a city, while a poorly tempered one could shatter in battle, leading to death. The Cabiri, therefore, were not simply benign helpers. They were the source of a volatile, dual-natured power that demanded respect and ritual appeasement. To earn their favor was to harness the very fire of the earth, to turn the dangerous breath of the underworld into the instruments of human achievement. This link to the Dioscuri reveals just how vital the Cabiri became to everyday life across the ancient world. While their secret rites promised a profound understanding of life and death, their most visible and celebrated role was as divine rescuers on the treacherous Mediterranean Sea. The younger Cabiri, those active sons of the great gods, were frequently identified with Castor and Pollux, the legendary twin brothers known as the Dioscuri. This was a powerful association. The Dioscuri were the ultimate saviors of sailors, and by merging with them, the Cabiri inherited a vast and desperate audience. Imagine a merchant ship caught in a sudden squall, the waves towering over the deck, the wind tearing at the sails. In that moment of terror, the crew would not be praying to a distant, philosophical concept of the underworld. They would be screaming for the Dioscuri, for the Cabiri, to appear and save them. And the gods answered in a way that was both breathtaking and strangely scientific. Their presence manifested as Saint Elmo's fire, that eerie electrical glow that can dance along the masts and rigging of a ship during a storm. To the ancient sailor, this was not a static discharge, it was a miracle. The sudden, calm light in the midst of chaos was seen as the physical forms of the twin gods, descending from the heavens to tame the storm and guide the vessel to safety. This tangible sign of divine favor made the Cabiri immensely popular, far beyond the confines of their remote sanctuaries. Their protection was not an abstract promise whispered in a secret rite. It was a visible, documented phenomenon that any sailor who had survived a bad storm could attest to. This is why their worship spread like wildfire along every major sea route. From the coast of Greece to the ports of Italy and across to the trading posts of the Near East, altars to the Cabiri and the Dioscuri sprung up in harbors. They became the guardians of commerce, of exploration, and of simple survival. A sailor might never make the pilgrimage to Samothrace, but he could leave a small offering at a local shrine, begging for the favor of the gods who appeared as fire on the mast. This practical, life-saving function transformed the mysterious chthonic gods into household names for everyone who depended on the sea, embedding them in the very fabric of Mediterranean civilization. This wild, ecstatic energy is where the paths of the Cabiri and Dionysus dramatically converge. While Hephaestus represented the controlled fire of the forge, Dionysus embodied a far more untamable flame, one that burned in the human soul. The connection seems jarring at first. What does the god of wine and revelry have to do with these mysterious underworld smiths? The answer lies in a shared source of power, the raw, ungovernable life force that erupts from the earth itself. The vine, like the volcanic vent, draws its strength from the deep soil, producing a fruit that can liberate the mind from its ordinary constraints. Both the Cabiri and Dionysus were masters of this chthonic energy, this primal current that flows beneath the surface of the civilized world. Their worship was not a quiet, polite affair. Ancient sources hint that some Cabiric rituals, particularly those in Thebes, involved a frenzied, ecstatic dimension that would have felt very familiar to a follower of Dionysus. We can picture torch-lit processions moving through the night, the rhythmic beat of drums, and the unrestrained dancing that carried participants into an altered state of consciousness. This was not mere celebration, it was a deliberate dismantling of the self. Why would a cult promising protection at sea engage in such orgiastic rites? The goal was liberation. In the throes of ritual madness, the initiate was temporarily freed from the strictures of society, from their own ego and fears. This ecstatic release was a form of death, a symbolic descent into the chaotic underworld of the psyche before being reborn, purified and empowered. It was a visceral, terrifying, and ultimately transformative encounter with the same raw power that the smith channeled in his forge and the vine expressed in its intoxicating fruit. To stand before the great gods was to acknowledge that creation and destruction were two sides of the same coin, and that true safety could only be found by first embracing the terrifying, ecstatic chaos from which all life springs. Far from the windswept shores of Samothrace, the power of the Cabiri took root in the very heart of mainland Greece. The ancient city of Thebes in Boeotia became a second great nerve center for their worship, but here their story was woven into the fabric of local legend in a uniquely intimate way. Thebes offered the Cabiri a home, and in return they gave the city a divine pedigree. The most prominent myth tells of the city's founding hero, the Prince Cadmus. After his long journey to found Thebes, Cadmus and his wife Harmonia were said to have been initiated into the mysteries of the Cabiri. This was no ordinary ritual. To have a city's legendary founder personally welcomed by these gods was a powerful statement of Theban prestige. It directly connected the political and spiritual identity of Thebes to the most powerful chthonic deities in the known world. This local tradition gave the Theban cult a distinct character. While the mysteries on Samothrace were open to all, a universal offer of protection, the cult in Thebes felt more like a cherished local institution, a divine heirloom passed down from the city's very first king. The rituals here were said to be wilder, more rustic, and deeply tied to the agricultural rhythms of the Boeotian countryside. Ancient writers describe a sanctuary outside the city walls where initiates engaged in raucous, celebratory rites. Unlike the solemn, awe-inspiring progression through the grand buildings of Samothrace, the Theban experience seems to have embraced a joyful, almost rowdy ecstasy. There was feasting, heavy drinking, and bursts of laughter that were themselves considered a sacred part of the ceremony. This vibrant, earthy worship complemented the more formal and internationally focused mysteries of the northern island. Samothrace offered a profound, cosmic revelation into life and death, a spiritual safeguard for the dangerous Mediterranean. Thebes, in contrast, offered a celebration of the here and now, a divine blessing on the fertility of the land and the prosperity of the city itself. It was the same group of gods, the same mighty ones, but they were refracted through a different cultural lens. The Theban Cabiri were approached as neighbors and patrons, their power channeled into the soil and the community. This dual presence from a remote island to a major mainland city demonstrates the incredible flexibility of the Cabiri. They were not rigid, dogmatic figures. They could be the profound masters of the soul's journey for a traveling sailor and the boisterous patrons of the harvest for a Theban farmer. Their ability to be both universal and intensely local, both terrifying and joyful, is what allowed their mysterious cult to thrive for centuries, speaking to the deepest hopes and fears of everyone from kings to commoners. The stones of their sanctuaries whisper of ancient devotion, a language of ritual meant to bridge the gap between mortals and these mighty chthonic powers. While the deepest mysteries remain locked in silence, we can piece together the outer forms of worship from the artifacts left behind and the scattered hints in ancient texts. The act of approaching the Cabiri began with a sacrifice, a solemn offering to gain their attention and favor. Archaeological evidence points to the sacrifice of pigs, an animal deeply associated with the underworld and fertility. The ritual would have been a powerful sensory experience. Imagine the scent of wood smoke and burning fat curling into the sky, the sound of chanted prayers as the animal was dedicated to the gods. This was not a casual gesture, it was a vital transaction, a sacred exchange of life for divine goodwill. Alongside the blood sacrifices, there were libations, the pouring of wine, milk, or honey onto the earth or into a sacred fire. This simple act was a profound offering, a gift of life's sweetness returned to the chthonic deities who controlled the fertility of the soil. The liquid would disappear into the ground, a direct channel to the gods below, sealing a pact between the worshipper and the divine. But perhaps the most telling evidence of daily devotion comes from the countless votive offerings discovered at sites like Samothrace and Lemnos. These were not grand statues, but personal, heartfelt gifts dedicated in hope or in gratitude. The most common among them were small, intricately made models of ships, crafted from clay or precious metals. These miniature vessels were left by sailors and merchants, a physical representation of their prayers. A captain might dedicate such a model before a long voyage, asking the Cabiri for safe passage, or having survived a terrible storm he believed was calmed by their intervention, he would leave a model in thanks for his salvation. These tiny ships are a direct window into the hopes and fears of ordinary people who placed their lives in the hands of these gods. Equally common were votives representing the forge and metalwork. We find small hammers, anvils, and even miniature tongs. These were the offerings of blacksmiths and artisans, the very people who worked with the elemental power the Cabiri commanded. A smith might dedicate a tiny anvil after successfully crafting a fine sword, acknowledging the divine skill that flowed through his hands, or he might make an offering before a difficult piece of work, seeking the favor of the gods to prevent the fire from raging out of control or the metal from shattering. These humble objects tell a clear story. The worship of the Cabiri was deeply pragmatic, rooted in the most fundamental human concerns: safety on the unpredictable sea and success in the transformative art of the forge. Every model ship was a life entrusted to their care. Every tiny hammer was a livelihood offered for their blessing. This was how the mysterious great gods were approached, not with complex philosophy, but with the tangible tokens of human struggle and gratitude. These silent clay witnesses waited for centuries beneath the soil of Thebes. Unearthed from the ruins of their sanctuary, a collection of peculiar pottery jars and cups offers a startlingly human glimpse into the Cabiric cult. Unlike the grand statues of Olympus, these vessels are anything but majestic. They are crude, often comical, and sometimes deliberately grotesque. Their surfaces are molded into the faces of men with bulging eyes, wide grinning mouths, and exaggerated, almost cartoonish features. These are not idealized gods, but characters bursting with a raw, earthy vitality. One famous skyphos, a two-handed drinking cup, shows a bent old man with a massive bald head and a long, hooked nose, his expression a mix of wisdom and absurdity. Another depicts a stout, bearded figure with a potbelly, dancing with an uninhibited joy that feels both sacred and deeply silly. Who are these figures? The most compelling theory suggests they are the Cabiri themselves, or perhaps their devoted initiates, portrayed not with reverence but with a profound and familiar affection. This was a form of worship that embraced humor and the imperfections of the mortal form. Imagine a ritual feast where these very cups were passed around filled with wine. As an initiate raised the jar to his lips, he would be staring into the distorted, laughing face of a god. It was a constant, tangible reminder that the divine could be found not only in awe and terror, but also in laughter and the freedom of ecstatic release. This aesthetic stands in dramatic contrast to everything we associate with classical Greek art. While Athenian potters were perfecting the graceful red figure scenes of heroes and gods, the artisans of the Cabiric cult were crafting these purposefully clumsy, expressive vessels. They were not concerned with beauty, but with power and personality. The exaggerated features may have served a magical purpose, a apotropaic magic designed to ward off evil with a grotesque grimace. Or perhaps they reflected the cult's core belief that true spiritual power involved a liberation from social norms, even the norms of physical beauty and decorum. These pots are the cult's sense of humor fossilized in clay. They tell us that the wild, rustic rites in Thebes were filled with a celebratory spirit, that the worship of the mighty ones involved a joy so vigorous it could border on the ridiculous. In their twisted smiles and bulging eyes, we see a religion that made room for the entire human experience, from the profound fear of death to the emancipating power of a hearty, irreverent laugh. Yet even among these laughing gods, a shadow falls. One of the most haunting myths surrounding the Cabiri tells of a brutal act of fratricide, where the two younger brothers conspire to murder a third. This story appears fragmented in the works of a few ancient writers, a dark whisper that contradicts the image of a harmonious divine family. The victim is sometimes named as a specific Cabirus, a third brother who stands apart. The motive is murky, often painted with the classic brush of divine jealousy. Perhaps the third brother possessed a skill or a power that threatened his siblings, or maybe he was simply the odd one out, a source of discord in their tight-knit circle. Whatever the reason, the two younger Cabiri lured him into a trap and cut him down. This is not a simple tale of crime and punishment. It is a story soaked in deeper, more unsettling meanings. On one level, it reads like a mythic explanation for the very land they ruled. The islands of the Cabiri, like Lemnos, were volcanic, places where the earth itself was known to breathe fire and tremble with violence. What if the murder of the third brother was an allegory for a volcanic eruption? The stabbing and killing of the god becomes the violent rupture of the earth's crust, his blood the lava that flows across the land, his death cries the rumble of the mountain. His body, buried in the underworld, becomes the source of the subterranean fires that the smiths would later harness. The myth transforms a terrifying natural phenomenon into a divine drama, giving a face and a story to the uncontrollable power of the earth. But there is an even more profound interpretation, one that resonates with the core of their secret rites. This myth of a god who dies could be the ultimate blueprint for the initiatory experience at Samothrace. The journey of an initiate was a symbolic death. They entered the sanctuary as their old self, and through the terrifying revelations of the mystery, that old self had to die. The murder of the third Cabirus mirrors this spiritual death. The initiate, like the murdered god, must be stripped of their former identity, their ego shattered, so that they can be reborn as something new, as an epops who has seen the truth. The violence of the myth reflects the inner violence of that transformation. It was not a gentle process, but a necessary killing of the mortal self to make room for the divine protector. This dark story, then, is not just about jealousy. It is a crucial key to understanding the terrifying and transformative power the Cabiri held over their followers, a power that required a symbolic journey through death to truly life. Their legend was even powerful enough to save a crew of legendary heroes. The most famous endorsement of the Cabiri comes not from a philosopher, but from an epic poem, the Argonautica. This is the story of Jason and his Argonauts sailing on a seemingly impossible quest for the Golden Fleece. As they navigate the treacherous waters of the Aegean, a sudden and violent storm engulfs their ship, the Argo. The waves are monstrous, the wind screams through the rigging, and even these mighty heroes are brought to the brink of despair. They are fighting not just for their quest, but for their very lives. In this moment of crisis, their navigator, the wise Tiphys, remembers the tales whispered in every port. He knows of a remote island where the gods offer a unique form of protection to those who seek it. He steers the battered ship toward the only sanctuary that can grant them what they need, not just stronger ropes or a patch for the hull, but a divine safeguard. They make for the shores of Samothrace. We can picture their arrival, the heroes stumbling onto the beach, not as mighty warriors, but as desperate men humbled by the sea's fury. They approach the sanctuary of the great gods and ask for initiation. There, under the sacred pledge of secrecy, Jason and his crew undergo the mysteries. They become mysti, novices welcomed into the fellowship of the Cabiri. When they finally set sail again, the poem tells us they are transformed. The favor of the great gods is upon them. The seas are calmer, their journey blessed. They have gained the ultimate protection for their epic voyage. Think about the profound message this story sent across the ancient world. This was not a simple myth, it was a divine advertisement. If the Cabiri could protect Jason and his larger-than-life crew on their impossible journey, what could they do for an ordinary merchant or a fisherman? The inclusion of this episode in a major epic cemented the cult's reputation as the go-to source for divine travel insurance. It linked the mysteries directly to the concept of heroic virtue and divine favor. To be initiated was to walk in the footsteps of Jason himself, to gain the same spiritual armor that allowed heroes to challenge the unknown and succeed. This heroic endorsement elevated the Cabiri from a local secret to a pan-Mediterranean power. It told every potential initiate that by swearing the oath on Samothrace, they were not just seeking safety, they were tapping into the very same current of fate that guided the greatest adventurers of the age. This promise of divine protection was a currency more valuable than gold to the men who shaped empires. The remote sanctuary on Samothrace became an unlikely stage for high-stakes politics, where kings and emperors went to seek not just spiritual solace, but a powerful tool for legitimizing their rule. When a Macedonian king like Philip II, the formidable father of Alexander the Great, chose to be initiated into the mysteries, he was making a calculated political statement. For a ruler whose power was constantly challenged, the endorsement of the ancient and revered great gods was a public relations masterstroke. It connected his dynasty directly to a divine source of authority that was older and, in many ways, more profound than the gods of Olympus. He was not just a king, he was a myst, a chosen one under the direct protection of the gods who controlled fate itself. This spiritual credential was a shield against rivals and a message to his subjects. His power was sanctioned by the most potent forces in the universe. The appeal only grew as the center of power shifted from Greece to Rome. Roman emperors, including members of the imperial family, made the pilgrimage across the Aegean. Why would the master of the Roman world bother with an ancient Greek cult? Because the Cabiri offered something the Roman state religion often lacked, a deeply personal, transcendent bond. An emperor surrounded by conspiracies and the constant threat of assassination craved the personal safeguard the mysteries promised. To have seen the secrets of the great gods was to carry an invisible armor, a divine bodyguard that no mortal soldier could provide. But the benefits were not merely personal. The sanctuary functioned as one of the ancient world's most exclusive networking venues. Within the sacred confines of the Arsinoean, a Roman general could share a ritual meal with an Egyptian priest, an Athenian orator could converse with a Phoenician merchant. All were bound by the same sacred oath, creating an international fellowship of the elite. This was a fraternity of power where political alliances were forged under the watchful eyes of the gods, deals were struck, and intelligence was shared. The initiation was a badge of trust, a signal that you were part of a privileged in-group that transcended national borders. For a ruler, having your key allies and potential rivals all initiated created a web of influence that was both spiritual and profoundly practical. The cult's power did not come from armies or wealth, but from its monopoly on a divine favor so potent that it compelled the world's most powerful men to humble themselves on a remote island, all for the chance to wear the invisible crown of the Cabiri. Rome's sprawling empire had a remarkable talent for absorbing foreign gods. When the legions and merchants encountered the Cabiri, they did not see them as obscure underworld deities, they saw something deeply familiar. The mysterious great gods of Samothrace were seamlessly integrated into the very heart of Roman domestic life, transforming into the Penates. These were the household gods who watched over the family storeroom, the pantry, the sacred hearth of the home. It is a startling transition from masters of volcanic fire and the fate of souls to divine guardians of the grain supply, yet the logic was impeccable. What were the Penates if not chthonic powers in their own right? Their domain was the larder, the deep, dark storage spaces that held a family's survival through the winter. They were the spirits of the earth's abundance, the guarantors that the seed buried in the ground would return as food on the table. The Cabiri, with their deep ties to the fertile mother goddess Demeter and the life-death-rebirth cycle, were a perfect match for this role. Their power was simply reframed, channeled from the cosmic scale of Samothrace into the intimate space of a Roman villa. A Roman paterfamilias, the head of the household, would make daily offerings to his penates, small statues kept in a special shrine. By equating these figures with the Cabiri, he was effectively inviting the mighty ones to dinner, asking them to bless his family's provisions and ensure its continued prosperity. This was not a demotion for the gods, it was a testament to their incredible versatility. They could be the terrifying saviors of heroes on the high seas and the gentle protectors of a child's meal. This domestic adoption reveals the core of their enduring appeal. Across centuries and cultures, the fundamental human needs remained the same: safety, sustenance, and a connection to the powers that govern life. The Cabiri, in all their forms, answered that call. They offered protection from the stormy sea that could sink a ship, and from the silent, creeping famine that could empty a storeroom. Their journey from the secret, torch-lit sanctuaries of a remote island to the humble hearths of countless Roman homes proves that their power was not in their obscurity, but in their profound relevance to the most basic and universal human fears and hopes. But perhaps the true origin of these gods lies far deeper than the classical world. Some anthropologists propose a startling theory that the Cabiri are not gods in the traditional sense at all, but the echoes of a prehistoric people, the spectral memory of master smiths from a forgotten age. This idea suggests their roots stretch back into the Neolithic or early Bronze Age, long before the arrival of the Greek-speaking peoples. In that distant time, the ability to work metal would have seemed nothing short of supernatural. Imagine a world of stone and wood, where a person who could pull shimmering, unbreakable bronze from a lump of rock using nothing but fire and a hammer would have been seen as a magician, a figure of awe and terror. These first metalworkers held a dangerous, transformative secret. Their craft was a form of alchemy, a seemingly demonic power to manipulate the very bones of the earth. They did not just make tools, they conjured them from the underworld. It is easy to see how such figures, after generations, could have been deified. The smith was no ordinary man. He lived apart, his workshop filled with roaring fires and strange, potent smells. His hands were stained, his body powerful from constant labor. He commanded a substance that could be both life-giving in the form of a plowshare and death-dealing as a spearhead. This dual nature fits the profile of the Cabiri perfectly, beings of immense creative and destructive power. They were the original masters of a technology so advanced it was indistinguishable from magic, and their legacy was so potent it survived the collapse of their own world. When new peoples, the ancestors of the Greeks, moved into the Aegean, they would have encountered the descendants of these ancient smiths. The newcomers would have marveled at their skills and feared their connection to the chthonic forces of fire and earth. Rather than erasing these powerful spirits, the new culture absorbed them, elevating them into their own pantheon as the mysterious Cabiri, the mighty ones. Their volcanic forges became the domain of Hephaestus. Their transformative, ecstatic rituals found a parallel in the worship of Dionysus. But at their core, they remained what they had always been, the divine patrons of a secret so powerful it shaped human destiny, the secret of metal itself. This theory paints them not as Olympian gods, but as the deified genius of humanity's first great technological leap, whose ghostly hammers still ring out from the depths of prehistory. The very name they left behind is a riddle carved from ancient tongues. Scholars have been wrestling with the meaning of Cabiri for centuries, and each proposed translation opens a different window into their shadowy world. The most widely accepted theory traces the name to a Phoenician root, Cabir, which simply means great or mighty. This interpretation paints them as the mighty ones, a title of raw power that fits their role as masters of the forge and saviors at sea. It also perfectly explains their widespread appeal across the Mediterranean, carried by Phoenician traders who embedded their name in the ports they visited. Yet another compelling theory connects them to the Luvian language of Anatolia, suggesting a root word related to fire. This would ground their identity directly in their most elemental domain, the volcanic fires of Lemnos and the transformative power of the smith's forge. They would be, quite literally, the fiery ones. Then there are the Greek attempts to make sense of the term, with some ancient writers trying to link it to their own word for a summit or a high place, though this feels less like an etymology and more like a later guess, an effort to fit a foreign concept into a familiar Greek box. This profound uncertainty over a single word encapsulates the entire mystery of the Cabiri. A name is more than a label, it is a key to origin and essence. The fact that we cannot securely pin down their name means we cannot securely pin down their homeland. Were they fundamentally Phoenician imports, Anatolian spirits, or pre-Greek deities whose true name was lost even to the ancients? Each linguistic theory pulls their center of gravity to a different part of the map. This debate is not just academic, it is a fingerprint of their journey. A name that resonates with Phoenician, Luvian, and Greek cultures is the mark of a god who traveled, who was adopted and adapted, whose identity was a fusion of many ancient worlds. The struggle to name them is the same struggle we face in defining them. They were everything and nothing all at once, earth gods and sea saviors, a family of brothers and a cosmic trinity, their true nature shifting like smoke from a sacred fire. This blurring of identities was a constant feature of their ancient story. The Cabiri were perpetually being mistaken for or merged with other mysterious groups of divine beings like the Corybantes, the Curites, and the Telchines. To the average Greek, these groups must have seemed like different names for the same shadowy chorus of underworld powers. The reasons for this confusion are buried in their shared elemental nature. All of them were fundamentally chthonic, their power surging up from the world's dark depths. They were often depicted as armed dancers, young men clashing their swords against shields in a deafening, rhythmic frenzy. Imagine the scene in a torch-lit grove, the air vibrating with the sound of bronze on bronze, the dancers whirling in a ritual that was both a war dance and an invocation. This was not for entertainment, it was a magical act. The Corybantes, for instance, performed their wild rites for the Great Mother Cybele. Their crashing music meant to drown out the cries of the infant Zeus, protecting him from his father. The Curites were said to have done the very same thing. Their dance was a form of divine protection, creating a sonic shield through pure, chaotic noise. This connects directly to the Cabiri's role as protectors of initiates and sailors, guardians who used ecstatic ritual to create a safe haven from danger. The confusion deepens with their link to craftsmanship. The Telchines, in particular, were renowned as the first metalworkers of Rhodes, master smiths and sorcerers who could summon storms and shape metal with a skill that seemed supernatural. They, like the Cabiri of Lemnos, were masters of the forge, beings who channeled the raw, creative, and dangerous power of the earth's fire. So why did the ancients constantly mix them up? Because these groups were not so much separate tribes of gods as they were different expressions of the same primal force. They were all personifications of the untamed energy that simmered beneath the civilized world, the power of the volcano, the fertility of the soil, and the hidden magic of metal. A community that worshipped the Corybantes as protective, armed dancers would hear of the Cabiri and think, those are our gods, just known by another name in a different place. A sailor saved from a storm by what he believed were the Dioscuri might later offer thanks to the Curites, seeing them all as manifestations of the same divine rescuers. This was not a failure of theology, but a recognition that these powerful, subterranean forces could not be neatly categorized. The Cabiri, the Curites, the Corybantes, the Telchines, they were a single family of ideas, a divine spectrum of protection, craft, and ecstasy, whose true boundaries were as fluid as the fire they commanded. The sanctuary on Samothrace, once a beacon for emperors and sailors alike, could not withstand the shifting tides of faith. The rise of Christianity introduced a new, uncompromising God who demanded exclusive loyalty. For centuries, the Roman Empire had been a tapestry of many faiths, where the mysteries of the Cabiri coexisted with gods from Egypt, Persia, and beyond. But that era of religious tolerance was coming to a decisive end. The pivotal blow fell in the 4th century, when the Christian Emperor Theodosius I issued a series of sweeping edicts that outlawed all pagan rituals and festivals. The ancient mysteries, which had survived for over 1,000 years, were suddenly declared illegal. The sacred rites of the great gods, once protected by a vow of silence, were now forbidden by imperial decree. Imagine the priests on that remote island, watching as the world that revered their secrets simply vanished. The pilgrims stopped coming. The ships that once crowded the harbor seeking protection now carried a different message, one that condemned the old gods as demons. The flow of offerings, the lifeblood of the sanctuary, dried up. Without initiates, without patronage, the vibrant heart of the cult grew still. The great circular Arsinoeon fell into disuse, its roof eventually collapsing, leaving the sacred space open to the sky it was built to shut out. The sanctuary was not destroyed in a violent purge, but something perhaps more final: it was abandoned. Nature began its slow reclamation, with weeds cracking the marble floors and vines climbing the altars where pigs had once been sacrificed. The silence that descended was no longer the sacred silence of the oath, but the empty silence of oblivion. What became of the last initiates, those who had seen the mysteries? They carried their secrets to their graves, their children and grandchildren likely embracing the new faith. The profound knowledge of Axiros, Axiokosa, and Axiokosos, the cosmic drama of life and death, simply faded from memory, becoming just another curious footnote in the texts of a few antiquarians. The mighty Cabiri, who had offered protection to heroes and emperors, were ultimately defenseless against the march of a new world order, their power dissolving not in battle but in silence and neglect. Yet their story did not end with the silencing of their rites. The Cabiri lay dormant for centuries, buried in forgotten texts and overgrown ruins, waiting for a new age to unearth their mystery. The Renaissance, with its fervent rediscovery of classical antiquity, brought them back into the light, but not as they had been. Humanist scholars, poring over ancient manuscripts, stumbled upon the cryptic references to these gods. They were no longer seen as divine protectors, but as enigmatic symbols of a lost primordial wisdom. To thinkers of this era, the Cabiri represented a knowledge older and purer than the polished philosophies of Plato and Aristotle, a raw, creative force from the dawn of time that the classical world itself had only partially understood. This fascination blossomed into full-blown obsession during the Romantic period of the 18th and 19th centuries. The Romantics, in their rebellion against cold rationality and industrial progress, were drawn to everything dark, mysterious, and untamed. They saw in the Cabiri the perfect embodiment of the primal, creative spirit they so desperately sought. The gods of the forge and the ecstatic rite became muses for a new kind of artist. No one championed this vision more powerfully than the German literary giant Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. In his later works, particularly in his collection of poems called The God and World Elegies, Goethe wove the Cabiri directly into his grand, universal philosophy. For him, they were not mere mythological figures, but living archetypes of ceaseless creativity and transformation. He saw their chaotic, generative power as a necessary counterbalance to the ordered, structured forces of the universe. They were the restless, chthonic energy that constantly reshapes the world, the very force that drives the artist to create and the seed to burst from its shell. This was a complete reinvention of their ancient role. They were no longer petitioned for safe voyages or successful metalwork, but revered as the ultimate symbols of the artistic soul itself. Poets and painters followed Goethe's lead, envisioning the Cabiri as shadowy patrons of the occult and the imaginative. They became figures of the sublime, representing the terrifying yet beautiful power of nature that could not be controlled or fully comprehended. In this modern reimagining, the wild, ecstatic dances of their initiates mirrored the romantic artist's own struggle for unbridled self-expression. The secret knowledge once guarded on Samothrace was now seen as a metaphor for the ineffable spark of genius, a force that could only be accessed through a kind of spiritual descent into the underworld of the unconscious mind. The Cabiri had been resurrected, not as gods to be worshipped, but as powerful ideas that gave form to the deepest anxieties and aspirations of a new era, proving that their mystery was a flame that could never be fully extinguished. Their archetype of the hidden earth-smith did not vanish with the last pagan prayer. It simply went underground, resurfacing in the folklore of medieval and early modern Europe, its divine origins forgotten but its core attributes strikingly familiar. Across countless village tales, we meet beings like the German kobolds or the Scandinavian trolls, creatures who dwell deep within mines and mountains. They are masters of metal, possessing an uncanny skill that far surpasses human ability. A kobold might be blamed for a collapsed tunnel or a vein of ore that mysteriously ran dry, but it could also be propitiated with a small offering of food or milk, after which it might reveal a rich new seam of silver. This dual nature, both helpful and hazardous, echoes the volatile power of the Cabiri, who could grant a perfect sword or let a forge fire rage out of control. The gnomes of later alchemical tradition carry this same torch. They are not the cheerful garden statues of modern times, but serious, earth-dwelling spirits who guard the secret treasures and metals of the subterranean world. An alchemist seeking to transform base metal into gold was in a way attempting to replicate the primordial magic of the Cabiric smith, channeling a power that was both creative and deeply chthonic. Why would these motifs persist so stubbornly? They answer a fundamental human need to explain the source of our most vital technologies. For millennia, mining and metalworking were dangerous, mysterious professions. The men who descended into the pitch-black earth or who commanded roaring fires were seen as dealing with forces beyond ordinary understanding. It was easier to believe that the ore itself was guarded by a capricious spirit, or that a blacksmith's talent was a gift from an invisible, earth-dwelling craftsman, than to accept it as mere human skill. The powerful but ambiguous Cabiri provided the perfect blueprint for this belief. They were the original model for the genius of the mine, the hidden hand that controlled the bounty and the perils of the deep earth. Their name was lost, but their story was too powerful to die, transforming over centuries into the whispered legends of subterranean smiths and tricksters that still haunt our oldest fairy tales. Even after centuries of scholarship, the Cabiri guard their final secrets with an unbreakable vow. We still do not know their true names, spoken only in the hushed darkness of the sanctuary. The exact nature of their initiation rites died with the last epops, the last person who saw. Their original significance before the Greeks and Romans layered their own interpretations atop the older Pelasgian foundation remains just beyond our grasp. Why then do these fragmentary, obscure figures hold such a powerful grip on our imagination? It is precisely the gaps in their story that invite us in. A fully understood god is a god contained, their power neatly catalogued and filed away. But the Cabiri are an unfinished puzzle, a divine equation with too many missing variables. Their enduring appeal speaks to something fundamental in the human spirit, a deep-seated attraction to the unresolved and the unexplained. We are drawn to the shadowy outline of their myth because it allows us to project our own search for meaning onto their mysterious forms. What does this long-lasting fascination reveal about us? Perhaps it shows that we are not truly satisfied with easy answers. We crave the thrill of the unsolved, the intellectual and spiritual itch that comes from knowing there is a mystery just beyond our reach. The Cabiri represent a direct connection to the raw, powerful forces that shaped the ancient world, forces that we, in our modern age, have largely insulated ourselves from. They are the gods of the volcano's birth, the metal's transformation, and the soul's perilous journey, all elemental struggles that resonate on a primal level. Their widespread worship, from remote islands to the heart of empires, tells us that humanity has always sought patrons for its most vital and dangerous endeavors. We do not just want gods of love or lightning, we need gods who understand the forge's heat and the ocean's fury, who offer a tangible safeguard in a terrifyingly unpredictable world. The Cabiri, in all their ambiguous power, answered that call. Their lasting mystery is not a failure of history, but a testament to their profound and enduring relevance, a whisper from the depths that we are still straining to hear. So we are left with a puzzle, a collection of fragments scattered across time. From the volcanic forges of Lemnos to the torch-lit sanctuaries of Samothrace, from the rustic laughter in Theban rituals to the quiet prayers of Roman households, the Cabiri defy a single, simple definition. They were masters of fire and sea, a divine family of life and death, and the spectral memory of the first master smiths. Our journey has sifted through these layers, piecing together clues from broken pottery, ancient poems, and the silent stones of their sacred spaces. Yet the complete picture remains just out of reach, shrouded in the very mystery they so fiercely protected. This enduring enigma is their final gift to us. The Cabiri stand as a powerful testament to the complex, living tapestry of ancient belief, where gods were not fixed statues but fluid forces, constantly reshaped by the hopes, fears, and encounters of the people who worship them. They remind us that some truths are not meant to be fully uncovered but to be pondered. Now we turn the mystery over to you. Which facet of the Cabiri captures your imagination the most? Is it their promise of protection for ancient sailors, their wild ecstatic rites, or their haunting origin as the deified first smiths? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this deep dive into the shadows of antiquity, subscribe for more journeys into the world's greatest ancient mysteries.